This video is for those of you guys that are struggling with getting a beautiful acrylic pour. If you're just frustrated because you can't get acrylic pouring, then this video is for you. I'm going to go over the 3 most common mistakes that I see beginners do, and we're going to talk about how to fix those mistakes. So let's get started. Okay, let's start with, these are some of the paints that we're going to be using. So let me just set those aside. And we're going to start with the first common mistake. So the first mistake that I see is that you guys either have the paint too thick or too thin.
Big mistake, big mistake.
So we're gonna do 2 pours, one where the paint is too thick and one where the paint is too thin. Here I have a paint that, even though it does flow off the stick, it's still, for me, it's a little bit too thick. If you add a drop of this paint into the cup and then count how many seconds that drop of paint takes to integrate into the rest of the cup, you'll get a better idea of how thick your paint is. So let's do a drop test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's kind of, yeah, like 6 or 7 seconds. So I like my paints to be, well, it depends on the pour, right? But anywhere from 1 second to maybe like 4 seconds at the most. For me, more than that is too thick. I'm just going to pour some of these paints right there. As you can see, the paint is taking quite a bit of time to flow, like to move. I mean, they are moving, but it takes a while. So it's not like you have to be there like tilting and waiting. And so the problem with this is, first of all, the paint is not going to flow. Okay, you're going to have a really hard time covering your canvas, and the paints are not going to really mix, so you're not going to get a very nice looking design. Like, you know, this black and red and gold, they're just kind of staying put there. Some of the black got even hidden underneath the gold and the red, so you can't really see that. And then there's no cells. You're not getting cells because they're just too thick, and so they're not mixing with each other. To get cells, you need your paints to mix with each other and basically be able to interact, and some of those paints can sink and some will float, and that will create the cells. But if they are not mixing because they're too thick, well, you're just not going to get the results that you want. It's just taking a very, very long time.
We're still waiting?
Yeah.
So the issues with having paint that is too thick is that you're going to have a hard time moving that paint around on the surface of your canvas. You're going to end up with a thick layer of paint that might end up cracking when it dries. Another issue is that basically your paints will not really mix with each other, so then your composition, your painting might not look that great. Also, you won't be able to create so many cells because the paints are just too thick and they're not mixing with each other. Okay, so I have 3 mixtures of paint here that are way too thin, and let me see if you can see the difference. So again, it's flowing from the stick, but if you see when the paint drops into the cup, you'll see that it forms some indentation first, right? So you'll see that makes a little dimple in the surface of the paint You can see that there. It just doesn't even create a mound. It just kind of sinks into the paint. So again, now we're gonna pour some of these paints here. Now you can see that these are spreading easier throughout the surface, but because they are too thin, they might just mix a little too much, and then, especially if you do them, for example, in a flip cup, then it's just going to create muddy looking painting. Let's just spread it so, yes, it's flowing a lot better, you know, flowing faster. And you might like this, but there are several issues when you have your paint too thin. Like I said, it's going to create muddiness. You're not going to see a lot of separation from those colors. Especially like if you are using colors that don't go very well with each other, you will start getting muddy colors there. Again, if you're using complementary colors like purple and yellow, then you're going to get mud. You're going to get a muddy painting. So these squiggly lines happen mostly when you have thin paint and when you tilt your paint too much. All of the squiggly lines.
It's a bunch of squiggly lines.
Having paint that is too thin is going to result in a painting that is muddy looking, or in a painting that has these squiggly lines. You know, the paint is just moving around too much. Your design is not going to stay put. So even though you might be able to get some lacing somewhere in there or some cells, those cells that lacing will move around. The cells might break up. Instead of staying around, they might be, you know, misshaped. Also, if you have a nice pattern, a nice looking design, and your paint is too thin, you might come back 2 hours later and find out that everything shifted or moved, and now you have a completely different painting than you started with. But most importantly,
And it's gonna be muddy.
especially when you use complementary colors. The second mistake is basically mixing paints that are different consistencies.
Huge mistake! Huge mistake!
So in this case, we have some leftover paints here in which, you know, they're too thick and some are too thin. So here the white and the black are more thick, but the red is not. So you'll start seeing that the red is just flowing, right? It's flowing super fast, but the black is staying a little bit behind, and the white as well. So here you'll just see that these paints are just flowing at different rates, and I don't think you can see it on camera, but right here in the middle, I have a big clump of paint, like a thick layer of paint. And over here, it's very thin because I'm trying to spread this out, but some paints are going faster than others, so they're not going evenly. Like right here, I have a gap where maybe I have some thicker paint and some of this is thinner and it's moving around faster. So I have a big area in the middle where it's a thick layer, and over here I have thin layers. And you know, you're just getting all these drips, right? Drip here, drip here, drip here. Some areas are not even moving, it's just because some areas are thicker there. So yeah, not a great idea. So the third issue that I see a lot of you doing is not using enough paint for the size of canvas that you're using.
Mistake after mistake.
In this case, we're using a 4x8 tile, and for this, size, I would use about 2 ounces of paint. This is a 2-ounce cup, so I would fill it up all the way, and that's how much paint I would use for this painting. How do I come up with that number? Well, basically I multiply your base, your height, divide that by 16, and that should give you an approximate estimate of ounces. So 4 times 8 is 32, and you divide that by 16 and you get 2. Now that amount might vary a little depending on how thick or how thin your paints are. So the thicker they are, the more paint you'll need. The thinner they are, the less paint you'll need. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to add my paints here, but instead of adding 2 ounces, I'm going to add maybe 1 ounce. Let's just do that and see what happens. As you can see, I already can tell that it's not going to be enough.
It's just not enough. Not enough.
Because I need to cover this and all of this. So right now we're kind of covering maybe like half of the canvas, roughly half. So if we would have added the whole 2 ounces, we wouldn't be having this issue of having to wait for the paint to move all the way over here.
Don't be stingy.
We would have just had enough paint to where we can flip to one side, flip to the next, get it evenly covered, fast and easy. And now, as you can see, I had, I guess, some cells going on there, but now they just look like squiggly lines because now I'm having to tilt this too much to try to cover, that area, and I'm just not going to have enough. So my cells will start looking all wonky. I'm just going to start seeing these lines, it's basically the paint stretching out. And if the paint is too thin, then I'll start getting the squiggly lines like in that painting over there. You see the point here. If I had just added another ounce, yes, I would have wasted some paint, but I would have kept my cells round looking and just have an overall easier time in getting my surface covered. Those are the 3 mistakes that I see a lot of beginners do.
Make no mistakes.
If you have any more questions, any suggestions, any other things that you're struggling with, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. Please subscribe and share if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!